On the morning of May 10, 1940, the Netherlands awoke to the thunder of engines crossing its skies. German paratroopers descended onto bridges and airfields while columns of soldiers poured across the border with astonishing speed. Within days, the quiet streets of Dutch cities had become scenes of panic, smoke, and surrender. Then came Rotterdam. A relentless aerial bombardment reduced much of its historic center to burning ruins, sending a chilling message to the rest of the country. Faced with the threat of even greater destruction, the Dutch government surrendered. For millions, the war had only just begun. The occupation transformed ordinary life into a world ruled by fear. Jewish families were ordered to register with German authorities. Businesses were confiscated. Rights disappeared one decree at a time. Friends became strangers, neighbors became informers, and every knock at the door carried the possibility of disaster. Thousands chose to disappear into attics, basements, farms, and hidden rooms, hoping silence would keep them alive. But hiding only worked if no one betrayed them. For ruthless criminals, this new reality offered something more valuable than survival. It offered profit. The German occupation rewarded anyone willing to reveal hidden Jews, confiscate their possessions, or help enforce Nazi rule. Men who had once lived on the fringes of society suddenly found themselves protected by one of the most powerful regimes in Europe. Among them was a figure whose name would become synonymous with greed, deception, and betrayal. His name was Dries Riffelgen. To some he appeared charming, well-dressed, and confident. Behind that polished image stood a calculating criminal who understood that war could be the greatest business opportunity of his life. While innocent families searched desperately for safe houses, Riffelgen searched for their hiding places. While children prayed to survive another night, he negotiated rewards, jewels, cash, and property. Every arrest meant another fortune added to his growing wealth. Yet the most astonishing chapter of his story had not even begun. After helping send countless victims toward almost certain death, the man who should have faced justice would accomplish an escape so unbelievable that it sounded like fiction. Hidden inside a coffin, surrounded by mourners and driven across an international border, one of the Netherlands' most wanted war criminals vanished before the eyes of those determined to capture him. Dries Riffelgen was born on September 7, 1909, in Amsterdam, the eighth child of a troubled working-class family. His early years were marked by hardship rather than stability. When he was only 6 years old, his mother died, leaving a wound that never truly healed. His father remarried, but alcohol consumed much of his attention, and the children largely grew up without guidance or affection. Poverty, neglect, and violence shaped the environment around the young boy, teaching him that survival often depended on taking advantage of others before they could take advantage of him. At 14, Riffelgen entered Pollux, a merchant navy training center in Amsterdam's harbor. Life at sea exposed him to a world far larger than the narrow streets of his childhood. After completing his training, he worked aboard cargo ships crossing the Atlantic and eventually spent nearly 2 years in the United States. There, while employed by Standard Oil, he encountered organized crime and admired the confidence, wealth, and influence of American gangsters. Expensive clothes, gambling, and easy money fascinated him far more than honest labor. Friends later claimed that he copied both their style and their methods, earning the nickname that would follow him throughout his life, the Dutch Al Capone. Returning to Amsterdam before his 20th birthday, Riffelgen quickly immersed himself in the cis criminal underworld. He dealt in stolen goods, traded jewelry and used automobiles, organized illegal gambling, and worked as a pimp in the bustling nightlife district around Rembrandtplein. He also embraced extremist politics, joining a fiercely anti-Semitic movement that dreamed of turning the Netherlands into another province of Hitler's expanding Reich. For Riffelgen, ideology mattered less than opportunity. Crime had already become his profession, and politics simply opened new doors. When Germany invaded the Netherlands in 1940, many citizens saw their freedoms disappear overnight. Riffelgen saw something entirely different. Occupation meant powerful new allies, weaker victims, and almost unlimited chances to enrich himself. The rules that once protected ordinary people were collapsing, replaced by fear and corruption. Men willing to collaborate suddenly enjoyed privileges denied to everyone else. Riffigan recognized that this brutal new order rewarded betrayal instead of honesty. He would not merely survive under Nazi rule. He intended to thrive within it, regardless of the human cost, and history would remember that decision with lasting horror. As German control tightened across the Netherlands, anti-Jewish measures became increasingly systematic. Registration lists turned into instruments of persecution. The yellow star of David isolated families from their neighbors, while businesses, homes, and savings were confiscated under the guise of legal authority. Beginning in July 1942, deportation trains departed regularly from transit camps such as Westerbork and Voort, carrying thousands toward Auschwitz and Sobibor. Few passengers understood their final destination, but many sensed they would never return. Across the country, desperate families searched for hiding places, trusting strangers with their lives, and clinging to the smallest hope that liberation might arrive before betrayal did. For Dries Riffigan, every hidden family represented an opportunity to make money. Working closely with the Sicherheitsdienst, the intelligence service of the SS, he became one of the occupation's most effective collaborators. His responsibilities extended beyond exposing black market activity. He hunted Jewish families in hiding, identified valuable property, and helped German authorities seize money, jewelry, artwork, and businesses before their owners disappeared into deportation trains. Officially, collaborators received a percentage of confiscated assets. Unofficially, Riffigan stole whatever he believed no one would ever reclaim. His methods relied less on brute force than manipulation. He presented himself as a man with connections, promising frightened Jews that he could arrange safe passage to England or secure false documents for escape. Families handed over cash, diamonds, heirlooms, and property deeds, believing they were purchasing survival. Instead, many were betrayed almost immediately after surrendering everything they owned. Some were arrested within hours. Others vanished into the machinery of the Holocaust, never realizing that the man they trusted had delivered them directly to their executioners. By 1943, Riffigan had joined the notorious Henike Column, a network of roughly 50 bounty hunters, whose sole purpose was locating Jews in hiding. They received cash rewards for every person captured, transforming murder into a profitable business. Thousands were delivered to German authorities through their efforts. Riffigan's fortune grew rapidly, hidden inside foreign bank accounts, and converted into valuables that could survive the war. While innocent people lost every possession they had ever earned, he expanded his wealth with remarkable speed. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One man became richer with every arrest, while entire families disappeared forever. Yet despite the suffering he caused, the greatest irony of his life was still approaching. Because the collapse of Nazi Germany would not immediately bring justice to one of its most ruthless collaborators. By the spring of 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing under relentless Allied pressure. German cities lay in ruins, Nazi leaders were fleeing or taking their own lives, and millions across Europe celebrated the end of years of terror. For the survivors of the Holocaust, liberation brought relief mixed with unimaginable grief. Across the Netherlands, investigators began searching for collaborators who had profited from betrayal. Few names generated more outrage than Dries Riffigan. Prosecutors believed his actions had contributed to the deaths of at least 200 people, while countless others had lost homes, fortunes, and entire families because of his deception. With his network collapsing around him, Riffigan understood that capture was only a matter of time. Yet instead of disappearing immediately, he made a calculated move that demonstrated the same manipulation that had defined his wartime career. He contacted Willem Evert Sanders, a respected resistance member who had become a police chief after liberation. Riffigan offered valuable information about former collaborators, hidden Nazi supporters, and criminal networks in exchange for protection. Rather than placing him in a conventional prison, authorities kept him under informal house arrest while evaluating the evidence he claimed to possess. The arrangement proved disastrous. In February 1946, Loyal friends from Amsterdam's criminal underworld organized an escape so audacious that it seemed lifted from a detective novel. A funeral hearse arrived carrying a coffin that appeared to contain the body of a deceased passenger. Hidden inside instead was one of the Netherlands' most wanted fugitives. Border officials, seeing nothing more than a solemn funeral procession, allowed the vehicle to pass. Without firing a shot or forging an official release, Riffigan slipped across the border into Belgium, concealed inside a coffin while the country he had betrayed searched desperately for him. From Belgium, trusted associates guided him through France toward Spain, using a network of criminal contacts built over many years. At one point he was detained because he lacked valid identification, but even that obstacle failed to stop him. A sympathetic Jesuit priest intervened, helping secure his release after arrangements were made for proper documents. Soon afterward, Riffigan obtained a Nansen passport intended for stateless refugees, while hidden diamonds that he had entrusted to an associate financed the next stage of his journey. Each escape deepened the frustration of investigators. The closer justice appeared, the farther their quarry slipped away, leaving behind only unanswered questions and devastated families still waiting for accountability. Dutch authorities refused to abandon the hunt. Investigators traced rumors, interviewed witnesses, and followed leads across Europe, convinced that sooner or later Riffigan would make a mistake. Instead, he continued staying one step ahead. After reaching Spain, he quietly slipped to Argentina in 1948, a country that had become a refuge for numerous Europeans seeking to escape the aftermath of the war. Although suspicions later surrounded possible escape networks, historians have never established definitive proof that his journey formed part of the organized Nazi ratlines. Even so, distance proved to be his greatest ally. In Buenos Aires, Riffigan rebuilt his life with astonishing confidence. He operated a press photo agency, cultivated influential friendships, and reportedly worked with elements of Juan Perón's intelligence service. Powerful political connections complicated every attempt to bring him back to the Netherlands. Extradition requests struggled against weak legal cases, missing evidence, and procedural barriers. Much of the available documentation focused on crimes committed before or outside the occupation, while proving responsibility for wartime atrocities beyond legal standards remained far more difficult than investigators had hoped. Justice, despite overwhelming moral certainty, repeatedly collided with the limitations of the law. Years passed. Europe rebuilt its shattered cities. Holocaust survivors shared their testimonies, and former concentration camps became places of remembrance. Yet one of Amsterdam's most notorious collaborators continued living in freedom. He traveled between Argentina, Spain, Switzerland, and Germany, relying on old contacts and wealthy companions to support his comfortable lifestyle. The contrast remained haunting. Countless victims had lost everything, while the man who betrayed them enjoyed decades that many believed he never deserved. On May 13, 1973, Dries Riffigan died from cancer in a private clinic in Montreux, Switzerland, at the age of 63. He was never convicted for the crimes that made his name infamous. His story remains one of the most disturbing examples of how war allows ordinary criminals to become instruments of extraordinary evil, and how justice can fail even when history remembers every betrayal. Today, Riffigan is remembered not for intelligence or courage, but for exploiting fear when compassion was needed most. He transformed desperation into profit, trust into deception, and survival into a business. His escape inside a coffin remains astonishing, yet it is only a footnote to a far darker legacy. The real lesson is not how he fled capture, but how easily greed and opportunity can flourish when humanity collapses. That warning, more than 80 years later, remains as relevant as ever.